The chip boom continues, but is it going to continue much longer? Accenture is deploying an army of agents with help from NVIDIA. AMD's AI chips are challenging NVIDIA's. Geopolitics have had a hit on your .io domain. Cisco has sold their stake in Rubrik, and CTERA is bringing AI to their data intelligence platform. Also, we're taking a closer look at Commvault's recent SHIFT event and their focus into continuous business instead of business continuity. All that and more on this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, where each time we meet, we run down the IT news of the week with a variable degree of snarkiness. I'm your host, Stephen Foskett, and joining me today, since Tom is out at Security Field Day, as my co-host, is the most incredible TechStrong gang host, Mr. Alan Schimmel. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Stephen, I feel like the rabbit has the gun after all the times you've been on TechStrong gang. I'm here.
I don't know how many times I have to tell you that I don't love that metaphor, man.
I know. It's an Ohio thing, maybe, but it's good to be here, though, and thanks for having me. Whether we're rabbits with guns or what have you, I appreciate you having me on.
Indeed. And I got to say, it is National Sports Day as well as National Dictionary Day. So I think they have all the seventh grade boys covered between those two.
Well, National Fossil Day, too. That one appealed to me. But here's what I want to know, Stephen. You and I have grown up. We've spent a few years on this planet. When did they start with all of these days?
Well, it's funny because they're all just like arbitrary anyway. Honestly, I think that's the subtext of us calling that out every week on the rundown. Here, a little editorialization to break the fourth wall here. Just pretend I'm Deadpool or something. You, listener, if you've ever wondered why we do these days, I think Alan's got something here. I don't know why we do it. I think it's because it's bizarre.
I always feel like I missed out because no one gave me the master calendar. And I go on Facebook and find out it's National Sons Day, it's National Divorced Fathers Day, it's National I used to have a dog, now I have a cat day. Who is there a committee appointing these days? What goes on here?
Or I think that you can actually just arbitrarily decide them. Corey, also, again, breaking the fourth wall here, it's also National Bosses Day. So a little shout out for that. So hey, Alan, let's all sing Daniel Newman a song. Nah, he's not the boss of anybody. All right.
Well, you could say I'm a terrible singer anyway, so probably don't want me singing.
Well, let's turn to the news of the week a little bit here. And I'm going to throw the first story to you, Alan.
Sure.
Global semiconductor sales jumped 20% in year-on-year in August 24, reaching $53 billion. With the Americas leading the growth at 43%, driven by, of course, AI, but also maybe cloud computing and automotive. Despite the strong recovery, supply chain disruptions are ongoing, and U.S.-China geopolitical tensions are, of course, always there. Export controls and national security concerns remain. The sector is expected to continue rebounding due to persistent demand across multiple regions. What do you think about this chip boom? Are we really in it? Is this going to last?
So there's no doubt that we're in a chip boom, right? I mean, it doesn't look at NVIDIA's market cap. Look at the recent AMD projections. I mean, the only one who doesn't seem to be benefiting from it is poor old Intel. However, there's the chip boom, and then there's the supply chain issue. And I think the supply chain issue is the gotcha that we've got to be wary of. You know what? To give the government their due, they set a strategic direction with this CHIPS Act and everything to try to spawn, domestic chip production. A, it's a very expensive proposition. B, it's going to take a really long time. And C, they even invited foreign companies like Taiwan Semiconductor to come here and open foundries. But from what I've read, it hasn't done so well. It's, we're grafting stuff onto trees and it's not really taking. So while I think we're in a chip boom And I think that we absolutely have strategic considerations to make sure that we control this supply chain. I am not as certain on that piece of it. I'll tell you something else interesting in the numbers. You mentioned the US led the way with about 43%. Overall global growth was, I think, 21 or 23%, in that about half of what the US growth rate was. Now, when you look at APAC, they were below. They were at about 17% growth rate, still a healthy clip, but nowhere near the US growth rate. And then Europe was negative. And I'm not quite sure why or how that jives in there. But clearly it's the US that's driving this boom in semiconductors. Accenture is positioning itself at the forefront of the emerging agentic AI wave by expanding its partnership with NVIDIA to leverage advanced AI capabilities within its operations. The company is launching the Accenture NVIDIA Business Group, which will employ an army of agents to tackle complex workflows, enhance efficiency, and deliver customized solutions for clients. While agentic AI presents significant opportunities for innovation, Accenture acknowledges the challenges of data security, ethical considerations, and the necessity for human oversight as these systems become increasingly autonomous.
Yep, it's an interesting world that we live in here, and I want to actually focus on one funny thing here. You say that they're employing an army of agents. Yes, yes, they have an army of agents. They're called the Accenture professionals. Yeah, but it's funny, of course, because you could read this and you could think, well, are these agents humans or are they AIs? I mean, what is Accenture doing here? So it seems to me that in this case, Accenture is planning on helping businesses to deploy agentic AI with a partner, NVIDIA. But of course, there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. Now, I recently gave a talk at Field Day, which you can view. I will include the links in the show notes here. I actually am going to publish this same day that this episode goes out, called What is Agentic AI? So if you're listening to this and you're like, wait, Agentic, what is Stephen even talking about? Well, essentially, the idea is that rather than just having AI be a tool that you use, Agentic AI is where you deploy autonomous agents that can act on your behalf and do things for you. So it's sort of like process automation in that essentially they sit there and lay in wait until you activate them, and then they sort of do a task that you've prescribed to them. But in this case, they are all essentially AI bots that are waiting. So, for example, you could have an agent that watches the price of flights and then pulls the trigger when the flight price reaches a certain level. And you might not have to specify that level. You might just have to say, buy me a ticket to Boca when the price is good and I can get there in the morning. And it'll sort of figure it out for you based on that. Now, that's a simplified version, and most agentic AI is actually not going to work anything like that. In fact, the agentic AI that they're talking about here deploying would be much more like the process automation stuff that you get from ServiceNow or from Salesforce or from some of the other companies that I've recently spoken with and written about on LinkedIn. These companies are essentially the next generation of process automation for businesses, where you would have a fleet of autonomous agents that would do supply chain or sales automation or marketing automation type tasks for you. And those agents essentially would sort of have a hierarchy. And I think this is another aspect of agentic AI that's important. They would have sort of a hierarchy from special purpose agents, like maybe an agent that understands email messages or an agent that can compose email messages. And then you would have sort of orchestration agents that would be able to employ those agents. So we're talking AI using AI. So imagine if when you're talking to ChatGPT, you could say, hey, ChatGPT, what's the price of NVIDIA? How much has the price of NVIDIA gone up in the last 10 years? And ChatGPT would talk to a special stock market agent who would then go retrieve that data. And then the stock market agent would talk to a calculation agent that would be able to actually do the math correctly. That's what we're talking about. And I think that is a pretty interesting prospect for a lot of businesses. Also, I think Accenture, NVIDIA, and many others are hoping that it's going to be the next big wave. We've talked about retrieval augmented generation, which is essentially a chatbot that can access your internal data set and answer questions based on that data. Well, I think agentic AI is another wave that people are hoping to see deployed in the enterprise, and that's why Accenture is getting involved here. So overall, I'm not surprised Accenture is getting involved here, but I do want to come back to that first bit. Accenture is deploying an army of agents. Honestly, if I was in charge of Accenture, I would absolutely be deploying an army of AI agents to do a lot of the tasks that Accenture and businesses like that have human employees working on right now, because a lot of those things are repetitive and could be automated. And frankly, I would be shocked if Accenture wasn't doing this to improve profitability theoretically and reduce staffing, unfortunately. So yeah, they're deploying an army of agents to deploy agents at companies, but I bet they're also deploying an army of agents to save themselves money. Now let's turn to a friend of yours, Mike Vizard, for another story. AMD announced the release of its MI325X AI accelerator, which is coming next year, and then is going to be followed thereafter by the MI350 series. All of these feature more memory, more throughput, more processing, and of course, the company also introduced its Pensando Ethernet Accelerator DPU, which we've talked about previously on the Tech Field Day events, as well as on the rundown. And of course, a 5th generation EPYC processor that improves performance by a significant percentage point. AMD CEO Lisa Su stressed the importance of leveraging open source software, building an ecosystem around the ROCm stack to allow people to use their AI accelerators, and of course, to try to push this in order to make a dent on the market, as Alan and I talked about on the TechStrong Gang yesterday. So let's get some perspective from TechStrong's Mike Vizard.
Hey, thanks for the throw, Stephen. This whole story was about faith in the future of AMD, and they are really talking about the next generation of their architectures. There's one where they're kind of saying, hey, this next thing we're coming out with is on the existing architecture, and it matches up with NVIDIA Blackwell. But they're also signaling that next year that they will deliver an additional architecture that's completely revamped, that'll be much faster, much more cost efficient. And this is a big deal in the land of AI because the cost of training models is really high, and the number of inference engines that you have is going to expand. And it's getting, of course, still really hard to find the GPU in the first place. And the cost needs to come down if we're going to have this AI revolution. So at the end of the day, I'm not quite clear that what AMD is talking about is having an immediate effect, but it gives people confidence that there's going to be some options on the table that they can at least consider. Some may decide to stay with NVIDIA. Others may decide to go to AMD. My bet is people are going to wind up with a mix of both because, after all, we need more GPUs than we possibly can make at the moment. So all sources are welcome.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's great to have your perspective on this story. And of course, as I mentioned, we also did talk about this on TechStrong Gang yesterday, so check that out on TechStrong TV.
In his latest column on Every.to, Gareth Edwards explores the British government's decision to transfer sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, an event that will lead to the retirement of the widely used .io domain suffix in the tech and gaming industries. This geopolitical shift highlights the interconnectedness of global politics and digital infrastructure as the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, IANA, for those of you watching, prepares to eliminate the IO country code, impacting literally numerous of existing websites. Citing historical precedents like the fall of the Soviet Union and the breakup of Yugoslavia, Edwards cautions tech founders to consider the implications of their domain name choices, as real-world events can significantly affect the digital landscape.
Yeah, who knew that .io wasn't .input-output, but was in fact .Indian Ocean? Well, actually, I think a lot of us did. But the point is that a lot of these domain names that are popular are actually the names of countries. .tv is Tuvalu, which is a great country in the Southern Pacific, and so on and so on. So, .io, great computer name, very computery. A lot of people have used this. A lot of people have used this domain. Heck, I had a .io domain name as a lark. I think a lot of us nerds end up registering domain names that we intend to use at some point and never do. Luckily, I let mine go and I didn't base my whole company around it. But we've had Tech Field Day sponsor companies that use .io as their primary name, their primary domain, min.io instead of minio.com, for example. And these things are going away. It's actually kind of a shock to me that the IANA is not going to allow the .io domain or TLD to continue, because while, of course, that means that the territory that it's named after will no longer go on, I mean, there's no reason that they can't have .io be a TLD that somebody else inherits. Maybe that's what's going to happen long term, but it does show the fragility of some of this stuff. I mean, frankly, a lot of us out there have registered domain names. I don't want to throw any stones at TechStrong, but you guys have a .ai domain at least, and I wonder, is that actually something that's going to continue forever? Or do you have to worry about it? That's one reason that I've always been quite keen on focusing on the .com, .net, .org, those traditional internet domain names, as opposed to the .biz and .co and all the rest of them. So it's an interesting story. I think there's some really cool perspective in this article as well. But I think it does give some of us a pause about some of the things that we think of as stable and everlasting on the internet. Well, they aren't. And domains can go away. Even top-level domains can go away, as we're finding with this transfer of territory in the remote Indian Ocean. One of the companies that's making waves in the data protection industry is Rubrik, and it may come as a surprise to some, just like it surprised me to find that Cisco has a stake in Rubrik. Well, not anymore. Cisco has sold its stake, worth about $6 million, following their April IPO. Despite the sale, the two companies say that they will continue to be strategic partners, and I have no doubt about that. And Rubrik is joining Cisco's Solutions Plus program in August, making its products available on Cisco's global price list. Alan, I wonder if you have some perspective on how it is that companies end up holding stakes, financial stakes in each other, and what does it mean when they decide to divest of those stakes?
Sure. So, Stephen, actually, I do have quite a bit of experience with this. Back in the .com days, company I had helped take public, we had similar type of relationships with IBM, Microsoft, and Dell, as well as network solutions. Going back to your .io story, they owned the internet name business back then. But and I actually did two of those deals, so I really, really familiar with it. Generally, and again, let me preface this by saying I didn't read this. I'm reading between the lines. But what it seems to me is Cisco and Rubrik entered into a strategic partnership prior to Rubrik's IPO, where Rubrik was going to sell through the Cisco channel. And make no mistake, getting on the Cisco Solutions Plus program and on their global price list is a ticket to ride, right? Because Cisco has one of the biggest channels in the marketplace today, and if you're on their price list, you just what falls into your lap out of it is worth money. In exchange for that partnership, it seems like Cisco CEO was appointed to the board of Rubrik, so they had a board seat, and I would imagine there were some warrants given, right, in Rubrik, and with Rubrik's IPO in April, Cisco, as any smart investor would, exercise those warrants. And post IPO, there was probably a lockup, I'm going to guess, a lockup period, and that's probably expired. And you know what? Cisco laid off 8,000 people in security a couple of weeks ago, and there was some charges involved in that. I'm sure they could use a couple of dollars. And I'm going to assume the warrants are in the black, and they sold the stake for a tidy profit, $6 million worth of money, and yes, they'll keep the relationship going. I would bet Rubrik wishes maybe Cisco bought more or just bought the company whole, but they are on their own as a public company now, and out there sailing the seas of the public markets. And Cisco has taken their pound of flesh as the big does when they're dealing with medium and smalls. So more power to them. I think a bigger question is really how tight is that strategic partnership going forward? Cisco's made some significant changes in their security business. They spent, what was it, 28 or $29 billion on Splunk or more. Splunk's now a big part of Cisco's security. A lot of the people that got laid off were from the old Duo security acquisition they had made for just a few $1 billion some years ago. I think Cisco's going through some changes and pivots, and I don't know how strategic that Rubrik partnership is going forward, frankly. So with that, Stephen, I'd like to go to our next story, which is CTERA has launched its data intelligence offering designed to enhance retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, by linking cloud file services data to chosen GenAI models, providing real-time private context to improve response accuracy. A CEO of CTERA, Oded Nagel, highlighted that the service enables organizations to securely integrate their proprietary data with AI, delivering relevant insights while maintaining data privacy. Through features such as semantic engines, identity-based access, and customizable virtual assistants, CTERA's solution supports both on-prem and cloud deployments, addressing challenges related to unstructured data and facilitating effective AI interactions with enterprise environments. Stephen, is this just another vendor saying we got AI too?
Well, it certainly is another vendor saying we got AI too, but I think it makes sense for CTERA to be saying that. So first off, let me give you a little perspective. So CTERA is a company that has been around for quite a while. They presented actually at Field Day a couple of times, most recently in September of 23, when we learned a lot about their various platform services, including from their CTO. Essentially, CTERA is not just a storage platform. CTERA really is truly a enterprise file and data platform. They have a global file system, yes, but they also have real data services, including analytics and governance and access as well through a portal, which means that it makes sense for CTERA to add AI features and not the sort of, a little co-pilot chatbot on the side that you can ask how to do stuff. No, CTERA is implementing RAG across the data sets that it controls. And it's really interesting the way that they're doing this, and that's that they're controlling access based on the access controls that they also have within their platform. So essentially, as I've mentioned previously here on the rundown and elsewhere, RAG is essentially saying, hey, large language model, here's a question for you, but I don't want you to make up an answer. How about instead of making up an answer, you actually look it up, given this data set that I have. You can summarize the data that I give you, and then you can give me an answer based only on that. And my challenge always when I'm presented with these platforms is to ask it a nonsensical question that it wouldn't have an answer to. So for example, I was talking to Click. They trained it on a customer support database, and I asked it what the capital of Nebraska was. And I was very happy to see that Click's RAG application said, I don't have that information. That's not in my data set. Well, that's what CTERA is talking about doing here as well, except on a much finer grained basis. So essentially, you would be able to have, assuming that you have the CTERA file platform, that you would be able to say, you meaning an enterprise user of the CTERA platform would be able to say, hey, what was that presentation that I gave back in 23 to some group called Tech Field Day? And it would be able to locate that file, or it would be able to give you a summary of the presentation slides, or it would be able to tell you maybe, other answers related to that. But if you weren't the person who was supposed to have access to that information, because it's very confidential proprietary information, hopefully the platform would say, hey, look, sorry, but you don't need to know what was said at Tech Field Day, but I will answer a different question for you. In other words, it would have AI assistants acting kind of the way that we want them to act which is giving information based on actual data and having controls around the data that they can share with the world or with specific users. It makes a lot of sense. I like this idea. And frankly, I agree with our own Camberly Bates, who you've seen here on the rundown, in saying that it really is a smart move for CTERA, and it will really help their customers with bringing AI without losing attention to things like data security, data classification, and data governance. So it's a smart product. Now let's take a closer look at a bigger story this week. As many of you know, if you watch the rundown religiously, which of course you do, I was absent last week because I was in London attending Commvault SHIFT. And this was a major industry presentation. This is their second SHIFT event. I shared some information from that event, and as did a lot of other folks in our community on our Gestalt IT live blog, as well as on, I wrote an article on LinkedIn, for example, as did some of the others. But overall, what we saw was Commvault moving forward with their plan to transform the company into a cyber resilience company and, as the CEO said, into a company focused on continuous business rather than business continuity, which is a cute turn of phrase. Sure, I'll give you that. But the point is that, to me, the overarching point of this whole event that really spoke volumes was Commvault is very keen on addressing the needs of their company, of their customers, rather than focusing on what their technology can do, which is a very refreshing thing in the tech industry, because most in the tech industry, especially in the data protection industry, have basically been focused for the last probably 30, 40 years on, isn't it cool that we can dump data to tape and find it and bring it back again, instead of, what problem are we trying to solve here? Is this about data governance? Is this about archiving for litigation? Is this about preparing ourselves in the event of a cyber attack? And how does this work in this modern cloud first era? Because again, Commvault has been in business so long that you would think that they wouldn't be clued in to how modern applications are built. But quite to the contrary, almost all of the technical presentations at SHIFT were focused on modern cloud first applications, and indeed even SaaS applications. And the company has recently made acquisitions of Appranix and Clumio that are specifically geared toward supporting those type of modern cloud first applications. Alan, I know that you know quite a lot about this industry overall, the cyber security industry. What is your take on data protection companies and their messaging in getting into cybersecurity?
So I like the word resilience, right? And first of all, I know Sanjay, the CEO at Commvault, for many years. Sanjay at one time was the CEO at Puppet. I don't know if you knew that. And before that, he was in Singapore for many years, telecom executive. He's incredibly bright, sharp guy. And he's built a heck of a team at Commvault over the years. I interviewed Sanjay when he first moved over to Commvault. This word resiliency is a great word because it encompasses so much about what's going on in cyber today, in that we're never going to stop attacks from taking place. I think we put a lot of effort into it. We do our best, but realistically speaking, we can't put all our eggs in the prevention basket. We need to put a good, healthy bet in our response and recovery basket. And resiliency embodies that, right? And yes, there were people who used to get off watching those robotic arms take the tapes out. If you've ever been to data centers where they have that, well, you have in your background, Stephen. And that was cool looking. But, in the heat of the moment, stuff hits the fan and you're saying, I need to restore from that, from this date. And you're watching that arm move ever so slowly, 1 degree at a time and pulling out. And now how long does it take to restore from that? It was like watching paint dry, and it wasn't. I was so disappointed when we at one time had to do that. But that being said, this resiliency thing is a great a great title to latch onto for Commvault to really modernize. I mean, quite frankly, they never had a cloud story, right? We're 20 years in the cloud, or the cloud era, let's call it. Don't
Yeah,
you think
it is
it's about
interesting
time?
that it took the arrival of somebody, a completely different kind of executive team to really change the game for Commvault. As
Mhm.
noted, I mean, we had our own Daniel Newman and Patrick Moorhead sit down with Sanjay Mirchandani, and I think that that's what you just said is really the message that comes through loud and clear in that conversation.
It really is. But that being said, you know what they say, better late than never. And they're here, and they bring substantial assets to it. I mean, they are, I don't want to use the term disaster recovery or backup like that, but they're a force to be reckoned with in that market. And if they can, you know, complete this pivot, and they're doing it, you mentioned some acquisitions. We're going to talk about one of them in a little bit. Um, this is a doable thing, and I think they have a great line, if you will, right? Their vision here, I think, is spot on. So, as I say, better late than never. Good for them. Now, execution's another story, and it's a crowded market. The last time I checked, there's something like 7,000 venture-backed or public companies in the cyberspace. So it's a crowded market with everyone saying, "Look at me, look at me, look at me." Um, but Commvault has the assets and resources to make people look at them.
Well, there's a few less venture-backed companies in the cyberspace thanks to Commvault. As you mentioned, they bought a couple of companies. It was very nice to see Clumio on stage. We talked about them on the September 25th episode of The Rundown. And this acquisition was really too soon, too new to make much of an impact on the content at Shift, though it was nice to see some familiar faces on stage talking about what they're doing with their really strong expertise around AWS S3 and doing snapshots and consistent data sets from S3 history. But I think the biggest focus was really on the Appranix acquisition, which is enabling their cloud rewind, which is a way to literally rewind or recreate a cloud application to the state that it was in at a point in the past. Now, this could be very valuable for things like compliance reasons, where we need to see where the data was and what was going on at a certain point in the past. Also, of course, this could be huge if you're getting hit by hackers or ransomware or something like that on your cloud applications. One of the things that was mentioned on stage, and I really want to emphasize this, a lot of companies assume that their SaaS providers are doing data protection on their behalf. Yeah, that ain't happening. That really ain't happening. And so if you're relying on this stuff for your business, it really is a good idea to try to have some kind of data protection, some kind of backup so that you can get to a known good state. But that's not super easy to do, especially when you have infrastructure as code, which potentially is redoing your entire infrastructure configuration all the time. How do you do that? Well, that's what Appranix was working on, and that's why Commvault has this. Are you familiar with these solutions, Ann?
Yeah, very much so. And Stephen, to reiterate or reinforce what you said, it's one thing to do this kind of thing when it's in an on-premises data center and you literally control the hardware, you control the storage, you control that data like that, on the hardware. When you're in the cloud and you're dealing in an S3, you know, environment, you don't have, root access, if you will. Restoring an application to a state on a given point of time is not the easiest thing in the world. I mean, because the whole point of when you go to the cloud, you're entering into a partnership with your cloud provider. But they're big, they're hyperscale, and they don't always give you all the attention you may want, or they charge you an arm and a leg for it. And so doing this kind of restore in the cloud live like that, It's impressive. That's an impressive feat.
In fact, in fact, those of us who've been in the industry for a long time, even more static on-prem infrastructure can sometimes be hard to recreate. People aren't documenting all the time when they add a new front-end server or when they add a new connector to some other application. That's the cool thing about the Cloud Rewind solution, is that it's basically I don't know, disaster recovery as code, in that it's actually going in there and looking at the code that defines the infrastructure and making sure that all that is picked up on a continuous basis. I love it.
Absolutely. And also for compliance, I think you mentioned it briefly, but I want to emphasize from a compliance point of view, what a great thing to have. What a great thing to have.
Absolutely. And yeah, to be able to confidently say, yes, this is the state that our application infrastructure was in. This is how we can make it run again. Yeah. And so, I really feel at this point that there's sort of a 4-horse race here in data protection. We have soon to be, well, we have number one currently, Veeam, soon to be number one in terms of sales volume, Cohesitas, or is it Vericity? Yeah, so Cohesity and Veritas, and then of course Commvault and Rubrik, and all of these companies are really making quite a lot of this. Now, of course, there are a lot of other data protection companies out there. I don't want to give short shrift to them, but according to most analyst reports, those are the top four. And those are the ones that are really duking it out at the top of this industry. It's interesting that each of them is taking a slightly different approach as well. So how Veeam has traditionally come for the mass market, the smaller businesses, whereas Commvault has always been more targeted, and Veritas have always been more targeted at the higher end, larger companies. I think that's one way to look at it. And then you've got companies like Rubrik and Cohesity that have, they're really focused on data protection to their own storage platforms. Though, of course, again, that's been changed a lot. I think a lot of the things that we assumed about these companies, though, are kind of out the window. I hear from my friends in Asia that Veeam is very active in some of the largest enterprise accounts. I hear from my friends in the cloud that companies like Cohesity are absolutely able to deliver things that aren't what you would think of as Cohesity data protection. And I hear from modern applications and so on that they're very impressed by what Commvault is doing, which again, I never thought I would be saying, but I absolutely am saying that because that's the state of the industry now. And so we'll be watching on the rundown, we'll be watching on TechStrong how this all plays out now that the industry is changing so much.
I'll tell you something else to keep an eye on, Stephen, and that is the cloud providers themselves, right? In their never-ending quest to squeeze more juice out of the lemon, more and more these kinds of add-on services, if you will, they'll have an in-house. AWS is famous for this. We'll give you 80% of the functionality for 20% of the price. And don't be surprised to see AWS and or Microsoft and or Google and or Oracle provide an in-house service, at least if for what you're hosting on their infrastructure, because they have access that those other four don't, quite frankly. And so it might be a little bit easier for them using a back door. They're not going to be as full featured. They won't be as robust as these others you've mentioned, but they'll also be a fraction of the cost. And for those people who are really cost conscious, it might very well do the trick.
Well, thanks for that perspective, and thanks for joining us here on the Gestalt IT Rundown. Check out the TechStrong gang. I'm usually on it most Tuesdays. Alan's usually on it most other days as well. And a lot of great conversation, a lot of great news coverage over there as well. And of course, you can catch the Gestalt IT Rundown on TechStrong TV as well. Before we go, let's take a look at some of what's going on in the Tech Field Day world. We have posted video from our recent AI Field Day, Edge Field Day, Networking Field Day with Nokia, and AI Data Infrastructure Field Day events. We this week, actually today, as you're watching this, are launching our Security Field Day event. You'll hear from Citrix, from Dell Technologies, DigiCert, and SonicWall. Coming up very, very soon, next week, is Cloud Field Day. You'll hear from Cumulo, VMware, Platform 9. We also have Networking Field Day coming in November with companies like Arista, Itential, Meter, Elicity, Aviz, and Path, and more events coming after that. So keep an eye on the Tech Field Day website for more information on those events. Also, I do want to say thank you once again to Alan for joining us and mention that we are closely partnering with TechStrong. So you'll see us on TechStrong TV, both for the news rundown as well as for our Tech Field Day events. So check out TechStrong TV and check out their incredible portals, Security Boulevard, DevOps.com, so many others. Thanks for watching the rundown this week. You'll catch new episodes every Wednesday. You can find them on YouTube or in your favorite podcast applications in addition to TechStrong. You'll also be able to catch other Futurum Group folks here joining us each week as part of our rundown coverage. And of course, we would encourage you to check out the Futurum Group on their social media channels as well. We'll be back next Wednesday to talk about the IT news from the week that was. But until then, for myself, for Alan, for Tom Hollingsworth, and for all of us here at Tech Field Day, here's wishing you an incredible National Bosses Day.